If you had told Rachel Turner just a month ago that her entire life would pivot on a rusted train car abandoned in the weeds, she would have laughed, maybe even cried. But that was before the eviction notice, before the sleepless nights, before the desperate hope that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe leaves a door cracked open for those who need it most. Before we dive into the story, if you believe in second chances, in the power of hope, or just love a good mystery, make sure to hit subscribe. Tomorrow I'll share another story that will remind you why we never give up, even when the odds seem impossible. Rachel's story didn't begin with a train car. It began in a cramped apartment on the edge of town, where the walls were thin and the future thinner. She was 32, a single mom, and the kind of tired that seeps into your bones. Her daughter, Lily, was 8, bright, curious, and blissfully unaware that their world was about to change. The eviction notice had been taped to their door for 3 days before Rachel found the courage to peel it off. 30 days. That's all she had left before she and Lily would be out on the street. That morning, Rachel stood in the kitchen, the pink slip crumpled in her hand, watching Lily eat cereal from a chipped bowl. The little girl hummed as she ate, swinging her feet, her innocence a sharp contrast to the storm brewing in Rachel's mind. She'd done everything right, or at least everything she could. Double shifts at the diner, weekend cleaning jobs, selling everything that wasn't nailed down. Her grandmother's locket, the good dishes, even her wedding dress from a marriage that had ended when Lily was 2. But it was never enough. The rent kept climbing, her paycheck stayed the same, and now, with just $53 in her checking account, Rachel was out of options. "Mom, are you okay?" Lily asked, milk dribbling down her chin. Rachel forced a smile. "Just thinking, sweetheart. Finish up, or you'll be late for school." After dropping Lily off, Rachel didn't go straight to work. Instead, she drove to the library, sat at an ancient computer, and scrolled through housing listings. Everything was too expensive. Even the worst neighborhoods wanted first and last month's rent, plus security. She tried the shelters, but the waiting lists were months long. She called her sister in Denver, but Maria had her own problems. 3 kids and a husband who'd just been laid off. By the time Rachel made it to the diner, she was 20 minutes late. Her manager, Carl, didn't even look up from the register. "That's the 3rd time this month, Rachel. I know. I'm sorry. My car wouldn't start. Save it. Just get to work." The lunch rush was brutal. Rachel's feet ached in her worn sneakers. Her back screamed every time she bent to wipe a table. But she smiled. She always smiled. Because rent money came from tips, and tips came from making people believe you were happy to serve them eggs over easy at 11 in the morning. It was during the afternoon lull that everything changed. Rachel was refilling salt shakers when old Mr. Jenkins shuffled in. He was a regular, 91, sharp as a tack, and full of stories nobody had time to hear. He always sat at the corner booth, always ordered black coffee and wheat toast, and always left exactly $3, no matter what the bill came to. "Afternoon." "Rachel," he said as she poured his coffee. "You look tired, girl." "Just busy," she replied, turning to go. But Mr. Jenkins caught her wrist, gentle but insistent. "Sit a minute. Carl's in the back and there's nobody else here." Rachel hesitated, then slid into the booth across from him. He studied her with eyes that had seen too much. "How bad is it?" She tried to deflect. "I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to an old man. I've seen that look before. Saw it in 37 during the Depression. Saw it in 43 when the war took all the men." "You're drowning, aren't you?" Rachel's throat tightened. She looked away, blinking hard. "We're getting evicted. I've got 30 days to find somewhere else. But everything's too expensive. I can't save up enough for deposits when I'm barely making rent as it is." Mr. Jenkins sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "You ever think outside the box?" "What do you mean?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of newspaper. "Found this in the classifieds. Been carrying it around for a week, trying to decide if I should show it to someone." He slid the paper across the table. Rachel unfolded it. The ad was small, just a few lines. "For sale. Vintage railway car. Located on private property outside town. Needs work. $500 OBO. Serious inquiries only. A train car." Rachel almost laughed. "Mr. Jenkins, I need a place to live, not a museum piece. Think about it. $500. No monthly rent. No landlord. Sure, it needs work. But you're handy. I've seen you fix that coffee machine a dozen times when Carl was too cheap to call a repairman. And maybe you could work out a deal to keep it there. Trade work for land use or something? Point is, it's a roof over your head for $500. When's the last time you saw that?" Rachel stared at the ad. It was crazy. Completely insane. But what other choice did she have? She'd saved almost $600 for next month's rent. That wouldn't matter once they were evicted anyway. "Keep it," Mr. Jenkins said, standing up. He left his usual $3 on the table. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that don't make sense on paper. That night, after Lily was asleep, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, the classified ad in front of her, the eviction notice beside it. She stared at both, weighing the impossible against the unthinkable. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a train whistle, faint but insistent, as if the universe itself was nudging her toward a decision. She picked up her phone and dialed the number from the ad, her heart pounding in her chest. It rang 5 times before a woman answered, her voice creaky with age. Yes? Hi, I'm calling about the train car. The one in the classified ad. A long pause. Still interested, are you? Most folks think it's a joke. I'd like to see it. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. I'll give you the address. Rachel scribbled down the directions on the back of an envelope. The property was 40 minutes outside of town, past the old lumber mill, down a dirt road she'd never heard of. She hung up, her hands shaking, and stared at the address. Was she really going to do this? Was she really about to spend her last $500 on a rusted train car in the middle of nowhere? The next day, Rachel told Carl she had a doctor's appointment and left after the lunch rush. The drive took her through parts of the county she'd never seen. Rolling hills dotted with abandoned barns, fields returning to forest, the skeleton of rural America slowly being reclaimed by nature. The dirt road was exactly where the woman said it would be, marked by a rusted mailbox with no name. Just the number 47 painted in fading white. The road wound through thick woods for nearly a mile before opening into a clearing. Rachel's beat-up Honda struggled over the ruts and stones, but finally she saw it, a small farmhouse with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Beside it sat a barn that had seen better days. And beyond that, on a section of track that seemed to go nowhere, sat the train car. Even from a distance, Rachel could see it was old, not ancient, but old enough to have stories. The paint was faded and chipped, showing patches of rust like freckles. Weeds grew up around the wheels, but there was something about it, something solid and permanent, that made her heart beat faster. A woman emerged from the house, small, bent, probably in her 80s. She wore a house dress that might have been fashionable in 1960 and walked with a cane that seemed more like a prop than a necessity. You the one who called? Yes, ma'am. Rachel Turner. She didn't offer to shake hands. Well, come on then. Let's get this over with. They walked across the overgrown yard, grasshoppers jumping away from their feet. Up close, the train car was bigger than Rachel had expected. It wasn't a full passenger car, more like what they used to call a crew car, maybe 40 feet long, with windows along both sides and a door at each end. Belonged to my husband, the woman said. Edwin collected all sorts of nonsense. Said he was going to restore it, turn it into a guest house or some fool thing. That was 25 years ago. He's been dead for 10. I'm sorry for your loss. The woman waved dismissively. Long time ago. Anyway, I'm selling the property, moving to Florida to live with my daughter. Everything's got to go. She produced a key ring with dozens of keys, fumbled through them, and finally found the right one. The door protested as it opened, hinges screaming like they hadn't moved in years. The smell hit Rachel first. Musty, like old books and forgotten spaces. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light coming through grimy windows. The interior was a time capsule. Bench seats lined both walls, their leather cracked but intact. The floor was solid wood, scarred but sound. At one end was what looked like a small kitchen area. A sink, some cabinets, even what might be a tiny stove. Edwin did some work on it, the woman said from the doorway. She didn't come inside. Put in the kitchen stuff. There's a bathroom too, though I can't say what shape it's in. Rachel walked slowly through the space, running her hand along the seats, testing the floor with her weight. It was dirty, yes. Neglected, absolutely. But underneath the grime, she could see potential. More than that, she could see a home. The electricity? There's a hookup. Edwin ran a line from the barn. Water, too. Though you'd need to check the pipes. And you want $500? That's what I advertised. Though I suppose if you had $400 for the VIFs, I wouldn't turn it down. Like I said, everything's got to go. Rachel reached the far end of the car where another door led to what must be the bathroom. She tried the handle, but it didn't budge. Is this locked? The woman frowned. Shouldn't be. Edwin never locked anything. Probably just stuck. Rachel tried again, putting her shoulder into it. The door remained firmly shut. She noticed something else, too. While the rest of the car showed 25 years of neglect, the area around this door looked different, cleaner somehow, like someone had been more careful here. What's behind this door? Bathroom. Like I said, maybe a storage area. Edwin had all sorts of plans. The woman sounded impatient now. Look, do you want it or not? I've got other things to do. Rachel took one more look around. It was crazy. Absolutely insane. But Mr. Jenkins had been right. It was a roof for $500. She could figure out the rest later. I'll take it. The woman's eyebrows shot up. Just like that? Just like that. Can I bring you cash tomorrow? Cash is good, but I need to know, what exactly are you planning to do with an old train car? Rachel met her eyes steadily. Live in it. For the first time, the woman's expression softened. Times are tough, aren't they? She glanced back at the car.
Well, it served its purpose sitting here empty all these years.
Maybe it's time it was useful again. They shook hands, the woman's grip surprisingly firm. One thing, the old woman said. The land. I'm selling to a developer, but the deal won't close for at least 6 months. You can keep the car here until then. After that, you'll need to move it or work something out with the new owners. 6 months. It wasn't forever, but it was longer than the 30 days she had now. Rachel nodded. Thank you. As Rachel drove away, she caught a glimpse of the train car in her rearview mirror, sitting on its forgotten tracks like a ship run aground. She had no idea how she was going to make it livable. No idea how she'd explain to Lily that their new home was a rusted piece of railway history. No idea about a lot of things. But for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. Hope, maybe. Or just the relief that comes from making a decision. Any decision, even a crazy one. That night, she sat Lily down after dinner. Baby, how do you feel about an adventure? Lily's eyes lit up. What kind of adventure? The kind where we live somewhere really different. Somewhere special. Like where? Rachel pulled out her phone and showed her a picture she'd taken. Like here. Lily studied the photo, her little forehead wrinkling. Is that a train? It's a train car, and it's going to be our new home. She waited for tears. For protests, for the entirely reasonable reaction any 8-year-old should have to being told they're moving into an abandoned train car. Instead, Lily's face broke into a huge grin. Like the boxcar children? For real? For real. Lily bounced in her seat. Can I tell Sophia? She's never going to believe this. Later, after Lily had finally fallen asleep, too excited to settle down, Rachel sat at their small table with a notebook, making lists. Things they'd need. Things she could sell to get them. Things she'd have to figure out how to fix. The list grew longer and longer, but somehow it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like a plan. The next morning, she withdrew $500 from her savings. It hurt to see the balance drop so low, but she reminded herself that this money would have gone to a landlord who was kicking them out anyway. At least this way, they'd have something. She met the old woman, Dolores, at the property at noon. Dolores counted the bills twice, then handed over a single key and a handwritten receipt. The big key is for the main doors, Dolores said. Don't know what the others are for. Edwin had keys to everything. She paused at her car door. You know, my grandmother lived in a converted railway car during the Depression. Said it was the hardest and best time of her life. Maybe that's why Edwin wanted this one. History repeating itself. After Dolores left, Rachel stood alone with her new home. In daylight, it looked even more daunting. The rust was deeper than she'd noticed, and several windows were cracked. But the bones were good. That's what her father would have said. The bones were good. She climbed inside and spent an hour really exploring. The kitchen area would need everything replaced, but the cabinets were solid wood underneath the grime. The main space was bigger than their current apartment. The benches could be turned into beds with some creativity. There was even a small coal stove at one end that might still work, but that locked door bothered her. She tried the handle again, then examined the frame. Unlike the rest of the car, which showed its age honestly, this door looked like it had been reinforced. The lock was newer too, maybe added in the last decade. Rachel found a crowbar in her trunk, one of the few useful things her ex-husband had left behind, and considered her options. This was her property now. She had every right to open any door she wanted. But something made her hesitate. The careful way someone had secured this space. The intentional preservation. She compromised by examining the door more carefully, running her fingers along the frame. She found something interesting. Scratches in the wood that looked deliberate. Letters, maybe, or numbers, worn smooth by time. At the bottom of the door, almost hidden by dirt, was a small metal plate. She knelt and rubbed it clean. Northern Pacific Railway 1934 crew quarters. The train car was 90 years old. How many miles had it traveled? How many stories had played out in this space? A sound made her jump. Footsteps on gravel. She turned to find a man approaching, probably in his 60s, wearing coveralls and a John Deere cap. You the new owner? He called. Rachel stood, brushing dirt off her knees. Yes, Rachel. Tom Morrison. I live next door. He gestured vaguely east. Saw Dolores leaving. Figured she finally found someone crazy enough to buy Edwin's project. You knew Edwin? Everyone knew Edwin. Good man. Bit of a dreamer. Tom walked around the car, appraising. He had big plans for this thing. Showed me drawings. Full restoration, modern amenities, the works. Even had some historical society people out here a few years back. Historical society? Yeah. Apparently this particular car has some significance. Edwin never said what exactly. He could be secretive about his projects. Tom's eyes went to the locked door. Never did get that section open, did he? Rachel's pulse quickened. He tried? Oh yeah. Last few years before he died, he was obsessed with it. Said the previous owner had sealed it up for a reason, and he wanted to respect that, but curiosity ate at him. I helped him try to pick the lock once, but Edwin backed off. Said it didn't feel right. The previous owner? Who was that? Tom shrugged. Before Edwin's time. He bought it from an estate sale in the 80s. The railway sold off a bunch of old cars, and this one had been sitting in a yard in Minneapolis for decades. He walked to the door and examined it like he'd done so many times before. You know what's funny? Edwin replaced everything else in here. Windows, some flooring, added the kitchen. But he never touched this door. Said it was part of the car's story. After Tom left with an offer to help if she needed anything, Rachel stood before the door again. Part of the car's story. What story? And why did someone go to such lengths to seal it away? She decided to leave it for now. There was too much else to do, but as she spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning and planning, her eyes kept drifting back to that door. Whatever was behind it had been locked away for a reason. The question was whether that reason still mattered. That evening, Rachel brought Lily to see their new home. She'd worried about her daughter's reaction, but Lily's response was everything she'd hoped for. Pure, uncomplicated joy. It's huge. Lily ran from one end to the other, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Can I have this whole bench for my bed? Can we hang curtains? Can we paint it? Rachel laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. We can do whatever we want. It's ours. Lily stopped at the locked door. What's in here? I don't know yet. It's locked. Like a mystery, Lily's eyes widened. Maybe it's treasure, or a secret room. Or maybe it's just a boring old bathroom. Nothing about this is boring, Rachel said, watching her daughter spin in a circle, arms outstretched. We live in a train. A real train. As they left that night, Rachel took one last look at their new home. Tomorrow she'd start the real work. Cleaning, fixing, making it livable. She'd have to figure out power, water, heat. She'd have to tell Carl she needed different hours. She'd have to swallow her pride and ask for help from people like Tom. But tonight, driving home with Lily chattering excitedly beside her, Rachel felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not just hope, but possibility. The train car sat on tracks that went nowhere, but somehow that felt right. They weren't going anywhere either. They were staying right here, making a life in a place nobody else wanted. And that locked door, it could wait. Whatever secrets it held had kept for 90 years. They could keep a little longer. But Rachel knew deep in her bones that eventually she'd have to open it, because that's what you did with locked doors when they belonged to you. You opened them and faced whatever was inside. The next few weeks were a blur of hard work and small victories. Rachel scrubbed floors until her knuckles ached, hung sheets for privacy, and learned that the coal stove actually worked if you coaxed it just right. Lily treated every day like an adventure, making friends with the field mice that scurried through at night, and telling everyone at school that she lived in a real train. Tom Morrison was a godsend, helping Rachel connect the water line and check the electrical hookup. The Historical Society Edwin had contacted years ago sent a packet of information about the train car's early years with Northern Pacific Railway, but nothing explained the sealed compartment. But on a particular Thursday evening, with Lily at a sleepover and rain drumming against the metal roof, Rachel found herself standing before the door again. She tried every key on Dolores's ring twice. She'd attempted to pick the lock with bobby pins like they did in movies, which only proved that movies lied about how easy it was. The crowbar still sat in her toolbox, a last resort she'd been avoiding. The rain intensified, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the hills. Rachel made herself a cup of tea on the camp stove she'd bought at a thrift store and sat on one of the refurbished benches, staring at the door. "What are you hiding?" she whispered to the empty car. As if in answer, lightning flashed, illuminating the interior in stark white. In that brief moment, Rachel noticed something she'd missed before. The wood floor near the door had a different pattern than the rest of the car. She knelt down, running her fingers across the boards. They were newer, probably replaced when the door was sealed. Working on instinct, she grabbed a flathead screwdriver and carefully worked it between two boards. The wood was solid, but not nailed as securely as the original flooring. After several minutes of gentle prying, one board popped free, revealing a small cavity beneath. Rachel's heart pounded as she aimed her flashlight into the space. There, wrapped in what looked like oilcloth, was a small bundle. She reached in, half expecting spiders or worse, but her fingers found only the package. The oilcloth was brittle with age, but had done its job. Inside was a leather journal, its cover worn smooth, and beneath it, a brass key. Rachel held the key up to the light. It was smaller than a modern key, with intricate teeth and a decorative handle. Without hesitation, she stood and inserted it into the lock. It turned with surprising ease as if it had been waiting. The door opened to darkness and the scent of time itself. Rachel stepped through into what should have been a simple bathroom or storage area. Instead, she found herself in a perfectly preserved time capsule. The space was larger than she'd expected, taking up nearly a quarter of the train car. Wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes and bundles. A small desk sat against one wall, with papers still spread across its surface, as if someone had just stepped away. She moved her flashlight slowly across the room, afraid to disturb anything. On the desk was a fountain pen, its ink long dried, a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, a coffee cup with a residue of ancient grounds, and photographs, dozens of them. Some framed, others loose, all in black and white. Rachel picked up the nearest photo with trembling hands. It showed a young man in a railway uniform standing beside the very train car she now called home. But when it was new, its paint fresh and bright, he was smiling, one hand resting proudly on the car's side. On the back, in careful script, James Mallister, head porter, Northern Pacific Railway, 1941. She set the photo down gently and examined the shelves. The boxes were labeled in the same careful handwriting. Personal effects, railway documents, the truth about Carlisle. That last one made her pause. She pulled it down, noting how carefully it had been sealed with wax. Inside were newspaper clippings, yellowed and fragile. The headlines made her sink into the desk chair. Railway heir missing. Senator's son vanishes without trace. Family offers reward for information on William Carlisle. William Carlisle. Rachel spread the clippings across the desk, piecing together a story from 8 decades past. William had been 23, sole heir to a railway fortune, when he disappeared in the spring of 1942. His family owned significant shares in Northern Pacific Railway. He'd been traveling from Chicago to Seattle when he vanished somewhere in Montana. His private car was found empty, his belongings undisturbed. But William was gone. The official story, according to the newspapers, was that he'd fallen from the train, his body lost in the wilderness. But there were whispers of other theories: gambling debts, a forbidden romance, even murder. The family spent a fortune searching for him, but William Carlisle was never found. Rachel turned back to the leather journal she'd found under the floorboards. The first entry was dated March 15th, 1942. My name is James Mallister, and I am writing this account because someone should know the truth. I have served the Northern Pacific Railway faithfully for 15 years. But what I have done, what I have agreed to do, weighs on my soul. Rachel pulled the desk lamp closer, praying the old wiring would hold, and began to read. James's story unfolded in careful paragraphs, his penmanship never wavering, even as his tale grew more incredible. He'd been assigned as head porter on the route from Chicago to Seattle, a prestigious position he'd worked years to achieve. On the night of March 10th, his crew car had been attached to a special consist, a private car carrying William Carlisle. The young man was not what I expected, James wrote. The newspapers paint him as a playboy, a wastrel living off his family's fortune. But the William Carlisle I met was different. Troubled, yes, haunted by something he couldn't name. He spent hours talking to me, the porter, the invisible man who served his meals and made his bed. He said I was the only person in months who looked him in the eye without seeing dollar signs. Over the course of the journey, William had confided in James. The fortune everyone envied was a prison. His father controlled every aspect of his life, had already chosen his bride, his career, even which clubs he would join. But worse than the control were the secrets. William had discovered his father's involvement in something dark, something that went beyond simple business corruption. He showed me documents, James wrote, contracts for transporting things that should never have been in those railway cars, lists of names, people who had disappeared when they asked too many questions, financial records that traced back to senators and judges. William had spent months gathering evidence, planning to expose it all, but his father found out. The journal entries grew more urgent. William knew his life was in danger. His father couldn't kill him outright. Too many questions would be asked. But an accident on a remote stretch of track, a young man known for drinking, falling from a train in the dark, that would surprise no one. He begged me to help him. This young man with everything, begging a porter for help. How could I refuse? We made a plan. Rachel's hands shook as she turned the page. On the night of March 12th, as the train passed through the remote mountains of Montana, James had helped William fake his death. They threw his coat from the train, left the private car's door open, scattered some of his belongings near the edge. Then James had hidden William in the one place no one would look, the locked storage compartment of the crew car. For 3 days, I smuggled him food and water. When we reached Seattle, I was supposed to help him disappear into the city. He had money hidden away, plans to start fresh under a new name. But something went wrong. The next entries were dated weeks later. William had made it off the train, but he'd been spotted by another railway employee. There had been a confrontation. William had been forced to run, leaving behind everything, including the evidence he'd gathered against his father. He came back, James wrote, 3 weeks later, in the dead of night. He found me, thin, desperate, but alive. He gave me everything. The documents, the evidence, even items from his childhood that he couldn't bear to lose. He made me promise to keep them safe. Someday, he said, when my father is gone, when it's safe, make sure the truth comes out. Rachel looked up from the journal to the shelves of boxes. All of this, William Carlisle's legacy, his proof, his personal treasures, had been sitting here for 8 decades, protected by a porter's promise. She opened the box labeled personal effects with reverent care. Inside were items that painted a picture of the man William had been. A pocket watch inscribed to my beloved son on his 21st birthday. A photograph of a young woman with my darling Margaret written on the back. Letters tied with ribbon. A small leather box that Rachel opened to find a ring. Not the ostentatious piece she'd expect from a railway heir, but a simple band with a modest diamond. He was going to propose, she whispered to the empty room. He was running towards something, not just away. The financial documents were in another box, and even with her limited understanding, Rachel could see why they were dangerous. Ledgers showing payments to judges. Contracts for transporting illegal goods using railway cars marked as carrying grain. Lists of competitors who had suffered accidents after refusing to sell their routes. But it was the last box that made Rachel's blood run cold. Photographs of William's father with men she recognized from history books. Powerful figures from the 1940s, whose influence had shaped America. Documents suggesting the railway fortune was built not just on transportation, but on knowing which people and goods to move without questions. And at the bottom, wrapped in silk, a small key with a tag, First National Bank of Seattle. Box 447, Rachel sat back, overwhelmed. This wasn't just history. This was evidence of crimes that had shaped fortunes still in existence today. The Carlisle family was still prominent in Seattle, still wealthy beyond measure. William's father was long dead, but his descendants sat on boards, funded politicians, owned newspapers. She returned to James's journal, needing to know how the story ended. I kept my promise. I sealed everything away, told Edwin, the man I sold this car to 2 years later, that this compartment must never be opened by anyone but the right person. I'm old now, and William never came back. I check the newspapers sometimes. The Carlisle fortune grew and grew. His father died peacefully in his bed in 1968, never paying for his crimes. But I keep hoping. Maybe William is out there somewhere, old like me, waiting for the right moment. Or maybe someone else will find this and have the courage I lacked. The final entry was dated December 1st, 1985. I am dying. Cancer. The doctors say months at most. I have no family, no one to pass this burden to. So I leave it here in the place where it all began. I've added my own key to William's box. The key to this room is now hidden beneath the floorboards. Only someone who needs this space, someone desperate enough to really look, will find it. Maybe that's how it should be. The desperate helping the desperate. Across the years, Rachel wiped tears from her eyes. James Mallister had kept his promise for over 40 years. And now somehow that promise had passed to her. She spent hours going through everything, taking photos with her phone, being careful not to damage the fragile documents. In one box, she found more recent additions, newspaper clippings James had added over the years, tracking the Carlisle family's rise. William was mentioned occasionally, always as the tragic son who fell from a train, a cautionary tale about the dangers of drink and privilege. But in 1987, 2 years after James's death, there was an interesting article. An elderly man in California had died and left a strange bequest, a scholarship fund for railway workers' children, funded by a fortune no one knew he had. The man's name was William Jameson, and he'd lived quietly as a carpenter for 45 years. The article showed a photo of the benefactor, and even aged and weathered, Rachel could see the resemblance to the young man standing beside the train car. You made it, she whispered. You built a new life. It was nearly dawn when Rachel finally emerged from the sealed room. The rain had stopped, and the first birds were beginning to sing. She stood in the main part of the train car, looking around with new eyes. This wasn't just an abandoned piece of railway history. It was a sanctuary, a place where truth had been preserved against all odds. Her phone buzzed. Lily, texting that her friend's mom was making pancakes and could she stay for breakfast. Rachel smiled and texted back yes, grateful for the time to process what she'd discovered. She made herself coffee and sat watching the sunrise through the windows James Mallister had looked through 80 years ago. The moral weight of what she'd found pressed down on her. The Carlisle family's crimes were old. the original perpetrators long dead. But their fortune, built on those crimes, still influenced the world. And somewhere in a bank in Seattle sat a safety deposit box that might contain even more evidence. Rachel thought about her own desperation, how it had led her to buy this train car for $500. She thought about James, keeping a dangerous secret out of loyalty to a young man who treated him with respect. She thought about William, choosing truth over fortune, love over family, freedom over comfort. The locked door stood open now, spilling its secrets into the dawn light. Rachel knew she could seal it back up, pretend she'd never found the key. She could focus on her own survival, on making a home for Lily, on keeping her head down and her problems small. But as she watched the sun rise over the hills, painting the old train car in gold and shadow, she knew that wasn't what she was going to do. Some truths demanded to be told, even if the telling came decades late. Some promises transcended the people who made them. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for the journalist who'd written a series on corporate corruption for the Seattle Times. Maria Santos had eaten at the diner a few times, always kind, always generous with her tips. They'd talked about kids and rent and the price of groceries, the casual conversation of two women trying to make it in an expensive world. Rachel hesitated, then typed out a text. "Hi, Maria. This is Rachel from Murphy's Diner. I know this sounds crazy, but I've found something you need to see. It's about the Carlisle family. Can we meet?" The response came quickly, despite the early hour. Intrigued. "Can you come to Seattle tomorrow?" "I'll make it work," Rachel typed back, her hands trembling with a mix of fear and relief. She spent the rest of the morning carefully photographing every document, every piece of evidence. She found an old suitcase in the train car's storage and packed it with the most important items, things that could be verified, cross-referenced, proven authentic. The personal effects she left in their boxes, unwilling to disturb William's memories more than necessary. As she worked, she kept finding new details. A love letter from Margaret that made her cry. A telegram from William to James after his escape. "Safe. Thank you for giving me back my life." W. A photograph of William and James standing together, dated a week before the accident. Both men trying to smile despite knowing what was coming. By the time Lily returned, bubbling with stories about pancakes and her friend's new kitten, Rachel had sealed the room again, not to hide it, but to protect it until the right moment. She'd made copies of everything, hidden them in a new place. If something happened to her, if the wrong people found out what she'd discovered, the truth would still survive. "Mom, you look different," Lily said, studying her with those two perceptive eyes children sometimes have. "Do I?" "Yeah, like when you decided we were going to live here." "Scared but excited." Lily hugged her. "Are we having another adventure?" Rachel hugged her daughter back, breathing in the scent of syrup and childhood. "Maybe, baby. Maybe we are." That night, after Lily was asleep, Rachel sat in the section that had been William's sanctuary and read more of the documents. She found business records showing that the Northern Pacific Railway had been transporting bootleg liquor during Prohibition, using their legitimate grain shipments as cover. She found correspondence between William's father and a senator discussing the removal of a union organizer who was causing trouble. She found bank statements showing payments to judges before key railway merger decisions. But she also found beauty. William had been an artist, and his sketches were scattered throughout the boxes, drawings of trains and landscapes, of Margaret laughing, of James serving coffee with dignity. There were poems, too, written in the margins of financial documents, as if he was trying to create something clean in the midst of corruption. One sketch caught her attention. It showed the train car from the inside, but not as it was now. This was William's vision of what it could be, a home, with curtains at the windows and flowers on the tables, children playing in the aisles while their parents read books in the evening light. At the bottom he'd written, "Sanctuary, a place where truth lives beside beauty, where the desperate find hope." Rachel looked around at her own version of that vision. Lily's drawings taped to the walls, the second-hand curtains she'd hung, the small pot of wildflowers Tom's wife had brought them. William had imagined this decades before she was born. Somehow, across all those years, his dream had found its way to her. The next morning, she called Carl and told him she had a family emergency. He grumbled, but didn't fire her. She was too reliable, too good with the customers. She drove Lily to school, then pointed her old Honda toward Seattle, the suitcase of evidence in her trunk, and William's story heavy on her heart. The meeting with Maria Santos lasted 4 hours. They sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop while Rachel laid out the evidence piece by piece. She watched Maria's expression shift from polite interest to genuine shock, to the kind of focused intensity that comes when a journalist finds a story that matters. "Rachel, do you understand what you found?" The Carlyle Foundation funds half the cultural institutions in Seattle. Robert Carlyle, William's nephew, is considering a run for governor. These documents change everything. In uncovering William's story, she'd found her own courage. She'd been running on survival mode for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to fight for something bigger than next month's rent. Lily was waiting on the steps Tom had helped them build, homework in her lap and a smile on her face. "How was your adventure?" she asked as Rachel got out of the car. Rachel sat beside her daughter, looking at their unlikely home, this train car that had sheltered secrets and desperate people across the decades. "It was good, baby. Really good. Are you going to tell me about it?" "Someday," Rachel said, thinking of William and James, of promises kept and truths finally told. "When you're older." "It's a long story." Lily leaned against her. "I like long stories. They're the ones worth telling." As the sun set behind the hills, Rachel thought about the locked door, now open, and all the secrets it had held. She thought about William Carlyle, who'd chosen truth over wealth, and James Mallister, who'd chosen loyalty over safety. She thought about herself, a single mother who'd bought a forgotten train car and discovered that sometimes the most desperate decisions led to the most extraordinary destinations. Inside the train car, in the room that had waited 80 years to tell its story, William's sketches rustled in a breeze from the open window. One showed a woman and child standing beside a train, looking toward a horizon bright with possibility. He'd drawn it decades before Rachel was born, but somehow he'd seen her coming. The truth was out there now, spreading like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Soon the world would know what the Carlyle fortune was built on. Soon William's sacrifice would mean something. But tonight, in a train car that had become a home, a mother and daughter sat together, safe and dreaming of tomorrow. And somewhere in whatever peace the departed find, James Mallister and William Carlyle finally rested. Their burden lifted, their story told, their promise kept. What happens next will shake Seattle's foundations and remind us why truth, like hope, can never truly be locked away. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. 2 weeks had passed since Rachel's meeting with Maria Santos. The journalist had called twice, her voice tight with excitement, confirming that initial fact-checking supported the authenticity of the documents. The Seattle Times was assembling a team for what would become the biggest investigative story of the decade, but Maria had warned it would take months before anything went public. Every fact needed triple verification when taking on a family as powerful as the Carlyles. Rachel had returned to her routine, serving coffee and eggs at Murphy's Diner, helping Lily with homework in the evenings, slowly improving their train car home. She'd thought the biggest secrets had already been revealed. She was wrong. It started with Lily, because of course it did. Her daughter had been playing hide-and-seek with Sophia, who'd come for a sleepover. Rachel was outside tending the small garden she'd started beside the tracks, when she heard Lily's excited shout from inside. Mom, come quick! The floor moves!" Rachel dropped her trowel and ran inside. She found both girls crouched near the corner where the locked room met the main car, pressing on floorboards. "Look," Lily demonstrated, pushing down on one board. It depressed slightly, and when she released it, there was a soft click. Sophia found it when she dropped her bracelet, Lily explained. Rachel knelt beside them, heart racing. She'd been over every inch of this car, but somehow had missed this. The board looked identical to the others, worn smooth by decades of footsteps, but when pressed in just the right spot. "Girls, go outside for a minute." "But Mom, please, just for a minute." Once they were gone, Rachel pressed the board again. Click. She tried lifting it, prying at the edges, but nothing happened. Then, on instinct, she pressed and held it down while turning it slightly clockwise. The board rotated, revealing a hidden mechanism beneath, a brass handle green with age. She pulled, and a section of floor she'd thought was solid lifted away, revealing a compartment even more carefully concealed than the locked room. This wasn't large, maybe 3 feet by 2, but it was deep, lined with what looked like lead sheeting. At the bottom sat a metal box, military green with stenciled letters, Lieutenant James Mallister, U.S. Army, Special Operations Executive. Rachel's hands shook as she lifted the box. James had been in the military, Special Operations. None of his journal entries had mentioned this. Inside the box, wrapped in waterproof cloth, were items that rewrote everything she thought she knew. Dog tags for Lieutenant James Fitzgerald Mallister, a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, a combat infantryman badge, and beneath the medals, a leather portfolio marked "Classified" in faded red letters. She opened the portfolio carefully. The first document was a certificate of appreciation from the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. It thanked Lieutenant Mallister for his extraordinary, Service behind enemy lines in the European theater, 1943 to 1945. Behind enemy lines. Rachel sank onto the floor, trying to reconcile the humble railway porter from the journals with this decorated war hero. More documents revealed the truth in fragments. James had been recruited by the OSS because of his railway experience. Who better to sabotage Nazi supply lines than a man who understood trains inside and out? He'd parachuted into occupied France in 1943, spent 2 years helping the resistance destroy bridges, derail transports, and smuggle refugees to safety. There were photographs. James in uniform, standing with a group of French resistance fighters. James receiving a medal from a general. James beside a destroyed railway bridge, a satisfied smile on his dust-covered face. But it was the personal letters that broke Rachel's heart. "My dearest Mary," one began, dated June 1944. "I cannot tell you where I am or what I'm doing, but know that I think of you every night. The stars here are the same ones you see in Seattle, and that brings me comfort. I've learned things in this war that change a man. When I come home, and I will come home, I want to live differently, simply, honestly. No more secrets, my love. No more lies." But there had been more secrets. The last letter in the bundle was dated March 1946, a year after the war ended. "Mary, my beloved wife, you've been patient as I've struggled to adjust to civilian life. The railway has taken me back, given me work. But you know, something still troubles me. I made a promise to someone, a young man who trusted me with his life and his truth. I've told you about William, about what I did to help him. What I haven't told you is that the skills I used, the forged documents, the hidden compartments, the escape routes, I learned them in France. I saved William using the same methods I used to save Allied airmen and Jewish refugees. Perhaps that's why God gave me those skills. Not just for the war, but for after. There are different kinds of battles, my love. Some we fight with guns, others with conscience. Both matter. Rachel found a smaller envelope marked "not to be opened until after my death," for my children. But there were no children. James and Mary's names appeared on adoption applications, fostering certificates, but never a final placement. They'd tried for 20 years to have a family, biological or otherwise, but it had never happened. Beneath the wartime documents, Rachel discovered another layer: correspondence between James and someone named David Kellerman, dated from the 1970s and 80s. The letters reference the network and our continuing obligation. It took several letters before Rachel understood. James hadn't been the only veteran using his skills to help people after the war. There was an entire underground railroad of former OSS and SOE operatives who helped people escape dangerous situations. Abused women, political refugees, whistleblowers. "We learned in the war that official channels often fail," David wrote in one letter. "Sometimes survival requires invisibility. You saved that Carlisle boy using our methods. How many others have we saved between us? Hundreds. The war taught us to forge documents, create false identities, move people unseen. Peace taught us those skills still have purpose." Rachel found a ledger, coded but decipherable with effort. James had helped dozens of people over the years, using the train car as a way station. Names, dates, destinations. Some entries had notes: escaping violent husband, witness to police corruption, union organizer threatened by company. The train car hadn't just sheltered William's secrets. It had been a sanctuary for desperate people for decades. Lily's voice brought her back to the present. "Mom, can we come in now? Sophia really needs to use the bathroom." "Just a minute, baby," Rachel called, frantically rewrapping the documents. As she lifted the metal box to return it, she noticed something else at the bottom of the compartment. Another box, smaller, made of carved wood with mother-of-pearl inlay. This one had a note tied to it for the keeper of secrets, from those who were kept safe. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written to James over the years. Rachel only had time to glimpse a few. "Mr. Mallister, you don't know me, but you saved my daughter in 1968. She was running from a man who would have killed her. You gave her new papers, a train ticket to Oregon, and a chance at life. James, it's been 10 years since you helped me disappear. I wanted you to know I finished medical school. I'm a doctor now, helping others as you helped me. To the angel in the train car. That's what my mother called you when she told me how you saved us. She passed last month, but made me promise to thank you one more time." Rachel heard the girls approaching and quickly closed everything, lowering the false floor back into place. Her mind reeled. James Mallister hadn't just been a porter who helped one desperate heir. He'd been a war hero who spent 40 years using his specialized skills to save anyone who needed saving. The train car wasn't just a hiding place. It was a station on a secret railroad run by veterans who couldn't stop rescuing people just because the war was over. That night, after the girls were asleep, Rachel returned to the hidden compartment. She spent hours reading through everything, piecing together the fuller picture of James Mallister's life. The railway porter persona had been perfect cover. Who paid attention to the black man serving coffee? Who noticed when he traveled different routes, always with good reason? Who questioned when desperate people seemed to find their way to him? Among the last documents, she found a list of contacts, other members of the network. Most entries were crossed out, marked deceased with dates, but 3 remained unmarked. David Kellerman in Portland, Sarah Chen in San Francisco, Marcus Webb in Vancouver. Phone numbers that might or might not still work. People who might or might not still be alive. Rachel stared at the numbers. Should she call? What would she say? Hi, I bought a train car and found evidence of your secret post-war refugee network. She was still debating when her phone rang. Maria Santos. Rachel, I need to ask you something. In all the documents you found, was there anything about James Mallister's military service? Rachel's pulse quickened. Why? Because the Carlyle family is pushing back. They've hired investigators to discredit the story. They're claiming James was a fantasist, that he made up the whole thing about William for attention. They say a simple porter wouldn't have had the skills to forge documents or hide someone so effectively. He wasn't a simple porter, Rachel said quietly. He was Office of Strategic Services, Special Operations in Europe. I just found his military records tonight. Silence on the other end. Then Rachel, this changes everything. Can you send me photos? An hour later, after sending encrypted images of James's military documents, Rachel made a decision. She picked up her phone and dialed the first number on the network list. It rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. Hello? Is this David Kellerman? A pause. Who's asking? My name is Rachel Turner. I bought James Mallister's train car. I found some things. Documents about the network. The silence stretched so long, Rachel thought he'd hung up. Then James is dead? Since 1987, I'm sorry. I thought you might have known. We lost touch in 85 when I moved. Tried to find him later. But a heavy sigh. You said you found documents, medals, letters, evidence of what you all did after the war. And what do you intend to do with this information, Miss Turner? Rachel thought about lying, about playing it safe. But these men had dealt in truth when it mattered. There's a journalist investigating the Carlyle family. William's story is finally coming out. The family is trying to discredit James, say he was nobody, a liar. I want to prove them wrong. Another long pause. How soon can you get to Portland? The next morning, Rachel called in sick again. Carl was going to fire her soon if she kept this up. She drove Lily to school, then headed north to Portland, the carved wooden box on the seat beside her. Inside were the letters from people James had saved. Testimony to a quiet heroism that deserved recognition. David Kellerman lived in a modest apartment overlooking the Willamette River. He was 93, sharp-eyed despite his age, moving carefully but with the residual grace of a trained operative. His walls were covered with photographs, young men in uniform, resistance fighters, blurred images of blown bridges and derailed trains. So, he said after examining James's documents, someone finally found the train car sanctuary. You knew about it? Of course. James brought me there in 71 when I had a refugee family that needed hiding. Remarkable place. Perfect for what we did. He studied her. You live there now? With my daughter. We were desperate, about to be evicted. The car saved us. David smiled. Then it's still doing what James intended. He always said that car was meant for the desperate. First William, then so many others. Now you. He pulled out a photo album. Let me tell you about your predecessor, Miss Turner. Let me tell you about the finest man I ever knew. For 3 hours, David talked about meeting James in France when they were both behind enemy lines. About the Jewish children James smuggled out in modified railway cars, hiding them in compartments he'd built himself. About the SS officer James killed with his bare hands to protect a family of refugees. About how James could forge any document, speak 4 languages, disappear into any crowd despite being one of the few black operatives in the European theater. The army tried to keep him stateside at first, David said. Didn't think a Negro, that's what they called him then, could handle covert operations. James proved them wrong the first week of training. Beat every white boy in hand-to-hand. Scored perfect on demolitions. Could plan a railway sabotage in his sleep. They had no choice but to send him, but after the war, he went back to being a porter. What else could he do? America wasn't ready for black war heroes, especially not ones trained in subversion and sabotage. But James found a way to keep serving. Different uniform, same mission. Helped the helpless, protected the vulnerable. David's eyes grew distant. We all did, those of us who survived, created our own network, our own underground railroad. No oversight, no bureaucracy. Just veterans who couldn't forget what it felt like to save lives. He showed her more photos. Sarah Chen, one of the few Chinese-American agents who'd operated in Burma. Marcus Webb, a Canadian who'd coordinated resistance activities across 3 countries, others whose names were lost to time, but whose faces showed the same determined compassion. The train car was special, though, David continued. James made it the heart of our Pacific Northwest operations. Perfect cover. A railway porter's quarters, moving when needed, staying put when required. He must have hidden 50 people there over the years, maybe more. I found the ledger, Rachel said. Some entries, but it was coded. David laughed. Of course it was. James loved his codes. Learned them from a French cryptographer who was also a poet. Said, secrets should be beautiful, even when hidden. He grew serious. Miss Turner, you need to understand something. What you found isn't just evidence about William Carlyle or even about James. You found proof of something larger. A network of people who refused to let their wartime skills atrophy in peace. Who understood that fighting evil didn't end with Germany's surrender. Rachel pulled out the carved box. David's hands trembled as he read the letters. Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. I know some of these names. That one, Patricia Hoffman. I helped James get her and her children onto a freight train to Canada. Her husband had connections to organized crime. Would have killed them all. This one, Robert Phan, Vietnamese interpreter who exposed corruption in the refugee camps, had a price on his head. God, I'd forgotten how many there were. Mr. Kellerman, the Carlyle family is trying to destroy James's reputation. They're saying he was a nobody, a liar, someone trying to get attention. David's face hardened, and for a moment, Rachel saw the warrior he'd been. Are they now? Well, we'll see about that. He stood, moving to a filing cabinet. I kept records, too. Different ones than James, but overlapping, including some very interesting information about the Carlyle family's activities during the war. He pulled out a folder. Did you know Carlyle Industries had contracts with the War Department? They did. Transported materials, troops, supplies, but they also transported things that weren't on any manifest. Things for people who operated in shadows, who needed items moved without questions. James wasn't the only one who noticed irregular shipments. We compared notes after the war. Rachel leaned forward. What kind of shipments? Art, gold, items that should have been in evidence lockers or returned to liberated countries. The Carlyles weren't the only ones profiting from chaos, but they were among the best at it. William must have found evidence of his father's wartime profiteering along with everything else. Would you be willing to go on record? Talk to the journalist? David considered. I'm 93, Miss Turner. What can they do to me? Kill me? I've been living on borrowed time since 1944. He smiled grimly. Give me the journalist's number. It's time some truth came out. Before Rachel left, David insisted on showing her something else. In a storage room in the building's basement, covered by a tarp, was an old steamer trunk. Inside were James's operational materials, forged identity documents, currency from a dozen countries, radio components, and at the bottom, wrapped in silk, a Nazi officer's dagger. James took this off an SS major who was about to execute a family of Hungarian Jews, David explained. Kept it as a reminder that evil wears uniforms, speaks softly, follows orders. He gave it to me before he died. Asked me to keep it safe. Now I'm giving it to you. I can't. You're the keeper of the train car now, the guardian of its secrets. These belong with you. He pressed a card into her hand. Sarah Chen's number. She's 95, but still fierce. Marcus passed in 2010, but his son knows the stories. Build your case, Miss Turner. Show them who James Mallister really was. The drive back to Cedar Falls took longer than usual. Rachel had to pull over twice, overwhelmed by the weight of what she'd learned. James Mallister hadn't just saved William Carlyle. He'd spent his entire life saving people, using skills honed in humanity's darkest hour to bring light to individual desperate situations. When she got home, Lily was doing homework at the fold-out table they'd installed. How was your trip, Mom? Educational, baby. Very educational. That night, after Lily was asleep, Rachel made 2 more calls. Sarah Chen answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting decades for someone to ask about James Mallister. Her voice was thin but steady as she corroborated everything David had said and added her own memories. James recruited me for the network, she said. Found me working in a San Francisco laundry in 47, bitter about how they'd treated us during the war. He showed me how to use my anger productively. Taught me forgery, surveillance, how to move through the world unseen. We saved 17 women from trafficking rings together. Marcus Webb's son, Paul, was equally forthcoming. Dad talked about Mr. Mallister all the time. Said he was the best operative he'd ever known, bar none. Kept a photo of him on his desk until the day he died. By the time Rachel hung up, she had pages of notes and a clear picture. James Mallister had been a hero twice over. Once in war, saving Allied lives and crushing Nazi supply lines, and, again in peace, creating an underground railroad for the desperate. She sat in the secret room, surrounded by evidence of extraordinary lives lived in shadows. Tomorrow she'd connect Maria Santos with David, Sarah, and Paul. The story would expand beyond the Carlisle corruption to encompass something greater, a network of veterans who'd refused to stop being heroes just because the war ended. But tonight, she simply sat with the weight of it. The train car creaked gently around her, as if acknowledging its role in this long, strange history. How many desperate people had hidden in these walls? How many new lives had begun here? A knock on the main door made her jump. She quickly closed the secret room and went to answer it. Tom Morrison stood outside, holding a casserole dish. "Wife thought you might appreciate not cooking tonight," he said, then paused. "You okay, Rachel? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Several, actually," she said, accepting the dish. "Tom, how well did you know Edwin? Dolores's husband." "Pretty well." "Why? Did he ever mention buying the train car from someone specific?" Tom scratched his head. "Now that you mention it, yeah. Said he bought it from an old porter in '85. Sick man, dying. Edwin visited him in the hospital a few times. Said the fellow made him promise to take care of the car. Keep that one room sealed unless the right person came along." The right person? Someone who needed it. The way he put it, Edwin always wondered what that meant. Guess now we know. Meant you. After Tom left, Rachel sat at her makeshift desk and began writing. Not the news story, that was Maria's job, but a letter to William Carlisle. Not the young man who disappeared in 1942, but the old man who died as William Jameson in California in 1987. "Dear William, my name is Rachel Turner, and I live in the train car where you once hid. I want you to know that James kept his promise. Your truth is finally coming out. The documents you gathered, the evidence you couldn't take with you, it's all here. All safe. The world will soon know what your father did. But I also want you to know something else. The car that saved you went on to save dozens of others. James turned it into a sanctuary for the desperate, just as you drew it in your sketch. He used skills learned in war to wage peace, one rescued life at a time. I found your drawings, the one of a woman and child by the train, looking toward a bright horizon. When you drew it, you couldn't have known you were drawing me and my daughter 70 years in the future. But somehow you saw us. Somehow you knew that one day another desperate soul would find safety in these walls. Your sacrifice mattered. Your courage created ripples that are still spreading. James became a hero because you trusted him. Others found freedom because he couldn't stop saving people after saving you. And now my daughter has a home because a train car has been waiting through the decades for the next person who needed it. Rest in peace, William. Your war is over. We'll take it from here." She sealed the letter in an envelope, though she had nowhere to send it. Sometimes you wrote letters not to mail them, but to acknowledge truths that needed stating. A sound from Lily's corner made her look up. Her daughter stood in her pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Mom, I had a weird dream. There were soldiers and trains and a man who said to tell you, 'Thank you for understanding.'" Rachel's breath caught. What did the man look like? Old. Kind eyes. He was wearing one of those funny train hats. Lily yawned. "He said the car remembers everyone who was brave here." Rachel pulled her daughter close, feeling the weight of history and hope pressed together in the small space of a converted train car. "I think it does, baby. I think it remembers them all." Outside, a real train passed on the distant main tracks, its whistle echoing through the valley. Inside the car that had sheltered heroes and refugees, protesters and abuse victims, a desperate heir and a desperate mother, Rachel Turner held her daughter and understood that some sanctuaries transcend time. The Carlisle empire would fall. The journalism was too good, the evidence too strong, the witnesses too credible. James Mallister would be recognized not as a lying porter, but as the hero he'd always been. The network of aging veterans would finally see their secret humanitarian work acknowledged. But more than that, a train car would continue to do what it had always done: shelter those who needed it most. Rachel had bought more than a home for $500. She'd bought a responsibility, a legacy, a trust passed down through desperate hands across the decades. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Maria would need more documents. The Carlisle lawyers would attack harder. David and Sarah would need protection as they went public with their stories. The complexities of exposing 8 decades of secrets would test everyone involved. But tonight, in a train car that had witnessed the best of humanity in the worst of times, a mother and daughter were safe and warm and part of something larger than survival. They were part of a story that said, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is offer sanctuary to someone who needs it. Whether that's a frightened heir in 1942 or an evicted family in 2025. The compartment under the floor held its remaining secrets close. The room that had waited 80 years for the right person stood ready for whatever came next. And somewhere, in whatever peace the departed find, James Mallister and William Carlyle and all the desperate souls who'd passed through these walls nodded their approval. The train car had found its newest keeper. The story continued. The sanctuary endured. The Seattle Times story broke on a Tuesday morning in November, 6 months after Rachel had first discovered the locked room. The headline read, "The Porters. Promise. How a war hero exposed one of Seattle's darkest secrets." By noon, every major news outlet in the country had picked it up. Rachel's phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. She'd turned it off after the 20th call, but reporters had already found their way to Cedar Falls. 3 news vans sat parked on the dirt road leading to the train car. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical flowers seeking the sun. "Mom, there are people with cameras outside," Lily said, peering through the curtain they'd hung over one window. "They want to talk to us about our house." Rachel pulled her daughter away from the window. "I know, baby. Remember what we talked about? Today is going to be crazy, but it's important. We're helping tell a true story about brave people who lived a long time ago." The story Maria Santos had crafted was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. She'd woven together William's evidence, James's military history, the post-war network, and Rachel's discovery into a narrative that read like a thriller but was backed by irrefutable documentation. The Carlyle family's attempts to discredit James had backfired spectacularly once his OSS records were revealed. Photos of James receiving the Bronze Star, testimonies from David Kellerman and Sarah Chen, the letters from people he'd saved, all painted a picture of heroism that captured the public imagination. But it was the detail about Rachel and Lily living in the train car, about a desperate single mother finding shelter in the same space that had hidden refugees for decades, that made the story personal for readers. The train car wasn't just a historical artifact. It was a continuing story of survival and sanctuary. Carl had called that morning, not to fire her, but to give her the week off. "Can't have reporters disrupting the diner," he'd said gruffly. "Besides, you're famous now. Bad for business if I fire you." It was the closest to kindness she'd ever heard from him. By afternoon, Tom Morrison had appointed himself unofficial security, parking his truck across the access road and politely, but firmly turning away anyone who tried to approach without permission. His wife, Betty, brought sandwiches and stood guard with Lily while Rachel gave her first interview to Maria Santos, this time with cameras rolling. "I never expected any of this," Rachel said, sitting on the steps of the train car. "I just needed a place to live that I could afford." Finding those documents, learning about James and William and everyone else who passed through here, it's been overwhelming but also inspiring. These were ordinary people who did extraordinary things when it mattered. "What happens now?" Maria asked. "The Carlyle family has issued a statement saying they had no knowledge of their ancestors' activities. There's talk of congressional hearings, investigations into wartime profiteering. That's for other people to sort out," Rachel said. "I'm just focused on preserving this place and these stories. This train car has been a sanctuary for the desperate for 90 years. I want to make sure it continues to be that in whatever form makes sense." The interview aired that night on the national news. Within hours, Rachel's inbox was flooded with messages. Most were supportive, people sharing their own family stories of hidden heroes or expressing admiration for James Mallister's courage. But there were also offers. Museums wanting to buy the train car, filmmakers interested in the rights to the story, publishers suggesting book deals. One email stood out. It was from Margaret Winters, now 98 years old, living in a care facility in Portland. Rachel's hands shook as she read, "My name was Margaret Collins when I knew William Carlyle. We were engaged to be married when he disappeared. His family told me he died, fell from the train while drunk. I never believed it, but I had no proof. I mourned him, eventually married another man, raised a family, but I never forgot my first love. When I saw your story, when I learned he survived, that he built a new life as William Jameson, I wept for hours, not from sadness but from joy. He lived, he escaped, he found peace. Thank you for bringing me that gift. I have something that belongs with the train car." William gave me a locket the night before he left Chicago. Inside is a photo of us and a tiny key. I never knew what the key opened. Now I think I do. May I visit? Rachel wrote back immediately, inviting Margaret to come whenever she felt able. That night, unable to sleep with the weight of the day's revelations, Rachel sat in James's secret room, reading through more of the documents. Among William's papers, she found a reference to a locket, to a safety measure he'd arranged in case something went wrong. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. a delegation from the National Railway Historical Society, led by Dr. Patricia Holloway, a preservation specialist who'd written 3 books on railway history. Ms. Turner, Dr. Holloway said, standing before the train car with obvious reverence, what you have here is beyond significant. This isn't just a piece of railway history. It's a testament to American courage, to the underground networks that have always existed to help the vulnerable. We'd like to help you preserve it. I can't afford professional preservation, Rachel said honestly. I could barely afford the $500 to buy it. Dr. Holloway smiled. That's why we're here. The Society has emergency funds for situations exactly like this. Moreover, I suspect once the public understands what this place represents, funding won't be a problem. She was right. By the end of the week, a GoFundMe page set up by someone in Cedar Falls had raised over $200,000. Messages poured in with donations. My grandmother escaped an abusive marriage in the 50s. I don't know if James helped her, but someone did. This is for all the secret heroes. My family fled Hungary in '44. People like James saved us. Preserving this history matters. The transformation began slowly. Dr. Holloway brought in experts who carefully documented every inch of the train car before any restoration work began. They found more secrets. A hidden compartment in the roof containing forged documents from various decades, another beneath the kitchen area with emergency supplies that had been refreshed regularly until James's death. Meanwhile, the human stories kept emerging. An elderly woman from Seattle came forward with photos of her mother, who'd hidden in the train car in 1958 while escaping a cult. A Vietnamese family shared letters describing how James had helped their grandfather defect with crucial intelligence in 1972. Each story added another layer to the train car's history. Margaret Winters arrived on a cold December morning, accompanied by her grandson. She was frail but sharp, her eyes still bright with intelligence. Rachel helped her up the steps into the train car, watching as the elderly woman's face transformed with memory. It looks different, Margaret said softly. But the bones are the same. William drew me pictures of it, you know. Said one day we'd take a trip together, just riding the rails to nowhere in particular. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. This is what I came to bring. The locket was gold, engraved with intertwining initials, WC and MC. Inside, along with a faded photo of a young couple radiant with hope, was indeed a tiny key. William was always cautious, Margaret explained. Said if something happened, if he couldn't come back, this key would matter someday. I kept it for 75 years, never knowing what it opened. Rachel studied the key.
It was smaller than any lock she'd seen in the train car. More like a safety deposit box key, but with unusual teeth.
She brought Margaret to the secret room, now carefully catalogued and preserved, and they searched together. It was Lily who found it because, of course, she did. While the adults examined obvious places, she'd been drawn to William's sketches on the wall. Mom, this drawing has a funny frame, she said, pointing to a sketch of the train car that had been mounted more carefully than the others. Behind the frame, set into the wall, was a tiny keyhole nearly invisible unless you knew to look. Margaret's key fit perfectly. The small door that opened revealed a cavity no bigger than a shoebox, but what it contained changed everything. Stock certificates, not for Carlisle Industries, but for dozens of small companies. A note in William's handwriting explained, I converted what I could of my trust fund before leaving. Invested in companies I believed would help build a better America. If something happens to me, these belong to Margaret. If she cannot be found, they belong to whoever keeps the sanctuary. Dr. Holloway, who'd been documenting everything, gasped when she saw the company names. These are, my God, some of these became Fortune 500 companies. IBM, Boeing, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing. That's 3M now. Even accounting for splits and changes, these certificates could be worth millions. Margaret, Rachel said. They're yours. He left them for you? No, Margaret said firmly. I have enough. My late husband was a good provider and I want for nothing. William would want this used for the sanctuary. I'm certain of it. Consider it my donation to the museum fund. The authentication and conversion of the stock certificates took months, but when complete, the trust established for the train car's preservation contained nearly $15 million. The media went wild with this new twist. The sanctuary that had sheltered the desperate now had the funds to continue that mission indefinitely. With proper funding secured, the transformation accelerated. The train car was carefully lifted onto a new foundation that would preserve it while allowing for climate control and proper maintenance. A small museum building was constructed adjacent to it, designed to tell the stories of everyone who'd found refuge in the car across 9 decades. Rachel found herself working closely with Dr. Holloway and a team of historians to ensure the museum honored all aspects of the train car's history. They created exhibits on railway heritage, on James's wartime service, on the post-war network of veterans, on each person whose story had emerged from the shadows. But Rachel insisted on one crucial element. The museum wouldn't just be about the past. A portion of the funding would support a continuing sanctuary program, helping people in desperate situations just as James had done. They partnered with domestic violence shelters, refugee organizations, and veterans groups to provide emergency assistance and safe passage for those who needed it. The train car can't physically shelter people anymore, Rachel explained to the board they'd assembled. But its spirit can. James Mallister didn't stop helping people just because the war ended. Neither should we. Lily, now 9, had become the unofficial ambassador of the project. She gave tours to visiting school groups, her natural enthusiasm making history come alive for other children. "This is where my mom and I lived when we had nowhere else to go," she'd say proudly. "And this is where heroes hid when they were saving people. And this is where Mr. James kept his secrets to protect everyone." Cool, right? The grand opening was set for May 15th, exactly 1 year after Rachel had discovered the locked room. The transformation of the site was remarkable. The train car, now restored to its 1940s glory, while preserving all the hidden compartments and modifications, stood as the centerpiece. The museum building housed the archives and exhibits. A meditation garden honored those who'd passed through the sanctuary. The opening ceremony drew hundreds. David Kellerman, now 94, cut the ribbon with hands that trembled, not from age but from emotion. Sarah Chen, despite her 96 years, had insisted on flying in from San Francisco. Margaret Winters sat in the front row, wearing the locket that had kept its secret for so long. "This place," David said in his speech, "represents the best of what we can be. Not the wars we fight, but the peace we wage. Not the official history, but the secret kindness that really shapes the world. James Mallister was my brother in arms and my brother in peace. I'm honored to see his legacy preserved and continued." The media coverage was extensive, but had shifted from sensationalism to genuine appreciation for the historical significance. The Carlyle family, facing multiple investigations and lawsuits, had quietly settled out of court, establishing their own fund for historical preservation. A transparent attempt at rehabilitation that fooled no one but at least provided resources for other museums. But for Rachel, the most meaningful moment came after the ceremonies when the crowds had gone home. She stood in the restored train car with Lily, just the two of them in the space that had saved them. "Are you sad we can't live here anymore?" Lily asked. They'd moved into a small house in town 6 months earlier, once the restoration work made living in the train car impossible. "Sometimes," Rachel admitted. "But look what it's become, baby. Look how many people will learn these stories now. Look how many more people will get help because of what we found." "Mr. James would be happy," Lily said with the certainty only children possess. "And Mr. William and all the others. They wanted to help people and now they still are." Rachel pulled her daughter close. "You know what? You're absolutely right. The first year of the museum's operation exceeded all expectations. School groups came from across the state. Historians arrived to study the archives. Veterans organizations held ceremonies. Most meaningfully, the Sanctuary Fund helped relocate 15 families fleeing dangerous situations, provided emergency assistance to dozens more, and established a scholarship program for children of refugees and abuse survivors. Rachel had quit her job at the diner. The museum board had insisted on hiring her as executive director, arguing that no one understood the spirit of the place better. It felt surreal, going from minimum wage to a salary that actually covered her bills with money left over. But she'd earned it through her careful stewardship of the stories and artifacts. Her insistence on honoring everyone who'd been touched by the train car's sanctuary. One rainy afternoon in November, a year and a half after everything began, Rachel was working in the archive room when Lily burst in. "Mom, there's a lady here who says she has something for the museum. She says her grandmother rode in our train car." Rachel followed Lily to find a middle-aged woman standing in the museum lobby, holding a worn leather satchel. "My name is Patricia Hoffman Miller," the woman said. "My mother was Patricia Hoffman. She left me this satchel and a story I never fully believed until I saw the news about this place." Rachel's heart raced. Patricia Hoffman. She remembered that name from the letters. One of the women James had helped escape an abusive marriage. "Please come to my office," Rachel said. "I'd love to hear your story." What Patricia shared over the next 2 hours added another chapter to the train car's history. Her mother had been married to a man with organized crime connections in 1968, desperate to escape with her 3 young children. Someone she never knew had connected her with James Mallister. He'd hidden the family in the train car for 2 days while arranging new identities and safe passage to Canada. "She started over completely," Patricia said. "New name, new life, raised us alone, working as a seamstress. She never told us the full truth until she was dying. Made me promise to keep the secret until it was safe. When I saw the news stories, I knew it was finally safe. From the satchel, she pulled out documents, the forged papers James had created, a photo of her mother with her children taken inside the train car, and a letter her mother had written but never sent, thanking the unknown porter who'd saved their lives. "This belongs here," Patricia said. "My mother would want people to know that ordinary heroes exist, that sometimes salvation comes from unexpected places." Stories like Patricia's continued to emerge. The museum's archive grew weekly as families came forward with letters, photos, memories. Each edition reinforced the truth that James Mallister and his network had saved more lives than anyone had imagined. The train car had become what it was always meant to be, not just a preservation of the past, but a living promise that sanctuary endures, that the desperate will always find helpers, and that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose compassion over comfort. If you believe in the power of hope, the courage of ordinary people, and the magic of second chances, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more stories that prove the past is never really gone. It's just waiting for someone brave enough to open the door.